If the European Union is to be believed, then close to 500 million people could get their say on what the future of the Union should be. Every single person in the bloc is being invited to give his or her thoughts on the future direction of the EU in what's called the Conference on the Future of Europe. This is Roundtable. Very good to have your company. I'm David Foster with echoes of Abraham Lincoln at Gettysburg in 1863. What should a government of the people, by the people, for the people actually look like? The Conference of Europe will give the EU's leaders and 450 million citizens the opportunity to reflect on the future of the European project. Supporters of the EU say the entity has been one of the most successful political projects in modern history. 27 sovereign nations working together for common goals. But in recent years there have been challenges such as the continuing migration crisis, the UK leaving, and the rise of right-wing politics in countries like Hungary and Poland. The coronavirus crisis has caused problems too, particularly with the EU's vaccine programme. But leaders say the agreement of an almost $1 trillion COVID-19 recovery fund is an opportunity to transform the Union. So, citizens will have their say. But what should the European Union really be about? Well, I'm very pleased to say now is the time we can kick around a few ideas. First, let's go to Warsaw in Poland. Welcome Roch Dunin-Wasowicz, who researches European civil society and co-wrote a report saying there's a rise of pro-European sentiment across the continent. To Florence in Italy from the European University Institute, we welcome Costanza Hermanin, who used to work for the Italian government and the European Commission. And back to Poland again, to Warsaw once more, where we see Wojciech Przybylski, editor-in-chief at Visegrad Insight, a leading think tank on Central European affairs. Now, I know I'm just presenting Roundtable, but just for a moment, pretend I am in charge of the Conference on the Future of Europe. And out of 447 million people, I have picked you three to give me one idea each on what you would change about Europe at the moment. So starting with you, Roch, off you go.
My idea would be very much in line with what we found in the report. So what civil society actors have told us is that we need to engage regular citizens in the day-to-day decision-making process in the European Union. There need to be structures, advisory panels, different types of sub-conferences that are ongoing where citizens, regular people, can be consulted on the changes that are made in policies of the European Union, and that people need to feel that their voices matter.
We will come back to whether that's feasible in just a moment, but Costanza, your turn now. What would you change if you had the chance to say what the future of Europe should be like?
I would change three things. First of all, in economics and financial terms, I think that we are on the right path, meaning that we have put some debt in common, but I think we need to have a common fiscal policy and to do more in terms of issuing, for instance, common debt, getting closer to what regular economies do. The second point would be to accomplish democracy at the EU level, regular mechanisms of democracy, so improve the way in which institutions are balanced, that the European parliaments get elected and the EU executive get nominated. And the last, the point that the previous speaker made, citizens' participation, is very important, and the EU could be a nice terrain to experiment that. But I think we need all the three together in order to move ahead with a big and necessary step.
We will come to those points in just a moment. Wojciech, your utopian view of Europe in the future.
Well, I would see European Union enlarging, and I think I would do everything possible to to have the countries who left, the country in particular that left the EU, and the potential candidate countries to feel welcome and to feel invited in the future of your project. So in a way to restart the project, or renew the project of enlargement of the European Union, which is now stalling.
Okay, thanks very much indeed for those first thoughts. Roch, back to you. The suggestion is that there should be more people's involvement. In other words, decisions shouldn't necessarily be taken by an unelected commission. Abolish the commission?
Well, the Commission isn't exactly unelected. It is the executive arm of the European Union. Its members are chosen by the heads of states and governments and the European Parliament.
It's not elected by the people that you want to see represented.
I think actually the Commission isn't the most undemocratic dimension of the European decision-making process, but I don't think we're here to discuss this. I think people mostly forget that it's the Council, so the heads of states and governments that are the roadblock for most progressive and participatory reforms in the European Union. But yes, I would argue that we need a fourth dimension. So beyond, besides the Commission, which is the executive, the heads of states and governments that make decisions, and the European parliamentarians, we would need regular citizens' assemblies like the one that is being put together right now around the Conference for the Future of Europe. So right now, the conference is inviting 200 randomly selected European citizens to give their opinions on the future of Europe. Why shouldn't this be the case through all the major changes to Europe's future and to its legislation?
Well, I mention that because we've got this from Andreas Kluth, who's writing for Bloomberg Opinion. Nobody currently has the faintest idea what this conference will be or do. There will be lots of platforms, panels and forums, mostly immodestly called agoras. Agora, of course, being those old market squares in Greece where the idea of democracy was first kicked around. To evoke ancient Athens, this bustle meant to approximate a sort of participatory democracy for the EU's nearly 450 million citizens. Costanza, nobody has the first idea how this is going to work.
Participatory democracy at the EU level? I mean, I still trust a lot representative democracy, and this is not accomplished at the EU level yet. I think we should get there in addition to experiment new instruments of participations. There are some instances, some examples in Europe where these instruments have worked out pretty well. I have mainly Ireland in mind with the consultations that happened before the referendum on the abortion law, and some other examples. We have the example of Switzerland, but that's a tiny, tiny country. But we have also got, I think, a failed example, which is Macron's Grand Débat, which were launched some time ago, and we don't know very well where they ended up. I think the experiment of the conference on the future of Europe and this participatory panel is interesting as a test. I would like to see how it goes before suggesting that this can really be employed for 400 and more million citizens of the EU.
Wojciech, forgive me, I'll be with you in just a moment, but I want to go back to Roch for just a moment. You talked about 200 randomly selected citizens from across Europe. It could be 200 financiers if it's random. It could be 200 cheesemakers or horseshoe makers. It's not representative of the bulk of the population.
Well, I don't. If it's random, then it'll actually be more representative, as it was in Ireland. And I think I agree with Costanza here that this was a good example of a citizens' consultation that actually not only made people feel included in the decision-making process, but changed public opinion. And I also agree with her that the Conference in the Future of Europe could be the first step to actually enshrine those kinds of changes to the decision-making process more permanently. In the LSE IDEAS report that you mentioned earlier, we actually argue for a permanent European Citizens Assembly to be put together, but also to include other actors of European politics and of European society into the decision-making process, such as localities and cities and and regions. So there is more to Europe than just nation states and the heads of states that represent them, and that's what needs to be part of the decision-making process.
You say that people have come to lately understand the benefits, the merits of the European project. Why so?
Well, our report looks particularly at civil society, so non-governmental organizations, different action groups, and social movements, etc. I think what we're finding is particularly that people no longer can brush Europe aside. Even if they don't necessarily agree with what the EU is doing, they take for granted that European politics is now their bread and butter. And that relates to both people who work on European issues, and we call them traditional Europeanists, but also people who deal with migration, who deal with transparency issues, and we call them instrumental Europeanists. So they have an agenda, and maybe 10 years ago, they would work on the domestic arena. They were very much concerned with what was happening in their particular domain, and a lot of them were not interested in European level politics. Today, it's a completely different story. And then you have what we call insurgent Europeanists. So this huge success of Volt in both the European parliamentary elections and some national elections and local elections with very little financial means and being an upstart in politics shows that there are now forces in Europe that see Europe as a integral part of policy making on par with the national sphere.
And is that the case, Wojciech, across Eastern Europe?
Yes, to a large extent, we see the engagement on the European scale. But interestingly, I would say this engagement doesn't come only from civil society. It comes very much also from the politicians. I mean, we have to remember that opening such a political platform, and the Conference on the Future of Europe is a political platform, has a political agenda set in motion by President Macron, with French ambitions and tied to the French presidency upcoming next year, presidency in the European Union, and also election cycle that takes place in France, has been designed by the initiators as a political platform that will also polarize society and open up polarization in Europe. This is why
I'm wondering. Sorry to interrupt. Can I just say this? I'm wondering whether the golden glow that Roch is putting on people's view of the European Union is reflected in the nationalist movements that we see in Poland, in Hungary, whether they are happy with what they've got at the moment, or whether they are pushing for something entirely different.
No, this is exactly my point. With this initiative, you see already members of the right wing or far right wing in Central Eastern Europe, but not only in this part of Europe, very happy because they are getting a platform to mobilize their voters around their vision of Europe, which is contrasting to what just Roch or Costanza was describing in more peaceful civil society, liberal view of what Europe might be or should be, and these voices have their constituency.
Could this backfire on those who are sitting at the head of all this, saying, "Let the people decide"?
Well, of course, if you look back at late April meeting, press conference, opening up the citizens' platform on the future of Europe, one of the questions journalists have been asking is, first of all, are you going to make a competition to Facebook on a European level with this platform? And secondly, how are you going to restrain the disinformation, misinformation, all the negative processes of the social media platforms and open democracy that has been exploited in the past years by the extremism in extremist movements in politics? And I do think that this will be an opportunity. It is an opportunity for the exact opposite of what we've just been discussing on this program, to take the stand in full spotlight of the Future of Europe conference.
Costanza, let's talk about this from an Italian point of view. Can you see where some of the disgruntlement, the dissatisfaction with the way that the European Union is run comes from. When people in Eastern Europe, or elsewhere indeed, look at Italy and see that it is getting 1/3, 33% of the entire coronavirus rebuilding money.
Well, if you ask me about where the resentment against Europe comes in Italy, then I would reply to you from the experience with the crisis in Greece, from the experience with the mismanagement of migration, which is an Italian mismanagement, but also European mismanagement. This is what turned the most pro-European country, a critical pro-European country, I frequently say, into a partly, but largely anti-European country that elected had the very first experiment of a populist force together with an extreme right-wing force in government a couple of years ago. So
but I'm wondering if that is waning now, because Italy is getting such a large chunk of this coronavirus money, perhaps as a panacea to push away that anti-European sentiment.
I think it will. Absolutely. So the Italian debate is the political debate is completely focused around how we are going to spend this enormous amount of money which is coming to Europe. The preoccupation about being able to spend them wisely caused the fall of the past government and the substitution of Prime Minister Conte with the present Prime Minister Mario Draghi, who has a big deal of European experience, especially in financial matters. And the League, the party which was the most anti-European, together with the Five Star Movement, which without being extreme right-wing nationalist was also extremely anti-European. You might remember when they went to meet the Yellow Jackets in France and other things they have said in the past. They are within this government. They are trying to normalize themselves. They have changed their narrative vis-a-vis Europe because people just started supporting.
So let me put this one to Roch,
back.
If I may. Let me put this one to you, Roch. That could be seen by some people outside as institutionalized corruption, directing money where you think it is going to have the most influence when it's simply there supposedly to help rebuild after a terrible pandemic, a form of bribery.
Well, I don't think that are accusing Europe of delivering and of actually responding to a crisis could be called bribery. But I agree with Costanza that what we find, and again, I said our report is about civil society, so NGOs and sort of organized movements and actors, is that their re-engagement with European politics, their critical re-engagement, and far from praising the EU as an institution or as an organization, but wanting to engage with it on a political level, has been put into effect because of the experience of the overlapping crises of the second decade of the 21st century. So the financial crisis, the euro crisis, Brexit, migration crisis, and now the pandemic. So this is what we're finding, and this is how this pro-Europeanism that you keep on talking is manifested. And what we're finding is essentially that even the forces that Wojciech was talking about, the anti-European, the seemingly anti-European voices, they don't want to leave the European Union anymore. They want to change in their own image, and they're entitled to have that opinion. But we've moved away from the discussions of yesteryear.
About where things are moving. In your discussions with civil society, in what you've researched, did you find that some people were particularly critical of the two major powers of the last 40, 50 years within the European Union, France and Germany, and feel that it needs to be more evenly distributed?
I think people are those people who we spoke to, and when they are mostly progressive European civil society, they were definitely critical of the horse trading that happens on the political level. The fact that most national politicians take credit for all the good that the EU is doing, and then they blame it for all their failings. And it's interesting also that that the people that we spoke to definitely look at European politics from a European and local perspective. They're quite a bit tired of that national perspective that kind of crowds the judgment of what is actually happening in European politics to an extent. And it is a lens that is still important. Member states are still the foundation of the European Union, but they're not where all the politics in the EU happens.
Okay, let's have a listen to what Ursula von der Leyen, the EU Commission President, had to say, particularly about the Recovery Fund.
We want to build a green Europe which protects our climate and our environment, and which creates sustainable jobs. We want to invest in a digital Europe, innovative and competitive in global markets. And we want a resilient Europe, which is better prepared to face future crises.
Wojciech, let me come to you. When she talks about a Europe which is better prepared to face future crises, is she talking specifically about the pandemic? Is she going back a few years? And is she admitting in that particularly in the last 12 months, the EU hasn't necessarily covered itself in glory?
Well, I think she restores the memory of European integration, which is all about moving forward because of subsequent crises in the past. Any major EU reform, and that one we have seen recently that included EU bonds and common European debt with the Recovery Fund, is one of these examples where Europe integrates more as a response to the crisis. It is not particularly future vision oriented. It's much more a reaction to a circumstance that Europe has not been designed for. That and many others, of course, in the past may leave us reassured that we will cope with multiple crises, but it's not so much particularly future-oriented vision of where we're heading. It just says that we can cope with whatever trouble we encounter.
Okay, we're coming towards the end of the program, so I want to ask you about a number of different things. Roch, a closer relationship with the United States of America, particularly under Joe Biden, is that possible with the European Union's relationship with China at the moment?
I think it's high time to resurrect the transatlantic bilateral relationship between the EU and the United States. And I think people now realize that it has to be based on geopolitics, it has to be based on trade, but it also has to be based on values. And this is also what civil society tell us. They want what we call a normative Europe. They want a Europe that is a shining beacon for itself and for the rest of the world when it comes to human rights.
Costanza, a Germany run by the Greens, which seems like it's a possibility at the moment, something for Europe to look forward to. Keep it quick if you don't mind.
Absolutely. I think that I've been talking about the importance of representative democracy. Certainly, representative democracy is undergoing a crisis. Germany is the first country which is trying to experiment a new political force at such a high level. It might be that together with the new instruments of participatory democracy, having some renewal in the ideas, in the political arena, in the common right-left-wing split could really help us making step forwards also against populist and anti-European movements.
Final question. Sorry to have to wrap it up. It's been fascinating, but Wojciech, this one comes for you. A European army?
Well, I would say European army is something that would be the foundation of a renewed Europe, but it's a dream far ahead. And first, we need to sort out fundamentals like the values that Roch mentioned to be set forward, to know on which principles and on which mechanisms, political mechanism, such an army could operate. So far, we still need to sort out the basics before we move forward for the army.
Okay, and just one very, very quick one, Wojciech, 50 years from now, Europe stronger or perhaps more fragmented?
No, I think Europe will be more united, and I do believe it will enlarge, as it has proven to be a successful multi or intergovernmental project of the 21st century so far.
Fascinating. Thank you very much indeed. And let us know what you've put down on that form when it arrives, or if you're one of the 200 randomly selected. Roch, Costanza and Wojciech, much appreciated. Great to have you on this round table. And wherever you happen to be watching this program, we thank you for your time. You can get plenty more on our YouTube channel. That's TRT World Roundtable on YouTube. From me, David Foster, from the entire team, we hope to have your company next time. Until then, bye-bye.